I call this discourse by the name that it calls itself, not the discourse of the eighth and ninth, but the eighth reveals the ninth. It is found in Nag Hammadi Codex 6.6, and it begins a mini collection of 3 Hermetic tractates, all at the end of this codex. The scribal note shows that whoever created the Nag Hammadi library was interested in the Hermetica and had asked for Hermetic books from a colleague. The colleague, who may also have been a scribe, selected some of these materials, but did not know exactly what books to include. The eighth reveals the ninth is most similar to the Discourse on Rebirth, or Corpus Hermeticum 13, which itself tries to implement the rebirth experience by prayer and hymn singing. The eighth reveals the ninth presupposes some ritual, such as we find in Corpus Hermeticum 13. It mentions that rebirth is necessary to see the vision of what is in the eighth and the ninth. Rebirth is the realization of oneself as divine consciousness or nous. The vision of the eighth and ninth is the vision of the realm in which noetic beings live above the stars and above the structures of time and fate. The text is not a liturgy per se, but it involves a series of prayers. The prayers help to spark and engage a real visionary experience. The vision is possible because the divine consciousness has actually traveled to the eighth and possibly to the ninth realm. Reading the tractate devoutly is itself an act of initiation, and it is our best example for actual Hermetic initiations based on concrete stages of learning and order of the tradition. The Hermetic initiate begins by reading what are called the general discourses, then the detailed discourses, in order to prepare for rebirth, and later revelatory discourses, such as the eighth reveals the ninth. The heart of the text are 2 prayers, which are also hymns, the first spoken by the master, and a second, shorter one, spoken by the disciple. Both involve the use of vowel sounds, the speaking of a secret or hidden name, and the identification of oneself with the higher divine consciousness. After the prayer of the master, he invites the disciple into a ritual embrace, a sign of spiritual and noetic union. After the initial prayer, the master has effectively become the God to whom he prays. He has become the nous, merged with the higher nous. And after his transformation has occurred, the disciple can in fact pray to Hermes as nous. At the end of the tractate, the scribe attached the prayer of thanksgiving as a fitting conclusion, and at the end of this particular prayer, there is a vegetarian meal. All these ritual elements could, of course, be fictitious, but they are still our best evidence for actual ritual practice in Hermetic communities, at least as they were envisioned. The spiritual master and the mystagogue is, of course, Hermes thrice great. He is a disciple who is a spiritual child, and Hermes has previously given birth to many spiritual children or disciples. These disciples are unnamed, perhaps to reinforce the idea that anyone can become a disciple of Hermes simply by reading these texts. In effect, the reader becomes a disciple by identifying with the unnamed disciple. In this act, one accepts Hermes as one's teacher. This book is called holy. It's holy not in itself, but because in the act of reading it devoutly, one undergoes Hermetic initiation. The text is designed not simply to spread information, but to generate a spiritual experience that can be repeated any time, any place. Though in an Egyptian temple or house of life, the conditions would be most apropos. The fact that the text is placed or described as being placed in an Egyptian temple, the Temple of Tot, is at least some evidence that Hermetic communities were somehow integrated into native Egyptian devotion and connected in some way to the priesthood. Reading the text is not enough for initiation. One must read it devoutly. If you don't pray the prayer in the text with your whole heart, mind, and soul, then you won't undergo the experience. You can know a lot about the experience, but the point is to have it. This experience requires preparation. Probably one must abstain from meat and sex, at least for a time. One must go through the full course of readings from the general and detailed discourses. One must cultivate an attitude of openness and seek a teacher who will mediate the visions. Then one is ready, or at least prepared, for the gift. And the experience is pure gift. In fact, the disciple is also called not just an offspring, but the gift of Hermes. Hermes speaks the revelation as a bubbling spring flowing toward him. It is not he who speaks, but Spirit who speaks through him. In Hermetic teaching, to know God and the divine world, one must become God. God is nous, or divine consciousness, and in and through prayer, this is exactly what Hermes becomes. He becomes nous, and as nous, he can actually travel to other worlds, what we might call other dimensions, and report on what he saw. As nous, one can travel through the spheres as quick as a flash, for nous is not a body made of molecules, and it's not limited by space and time. Thus, one can travel through the 7 planetary spheres with all their powers in an instant. These are the spheres of the 7 planets, the lords of essence, who control fate. Fate itself only controls fleshly bodies, not pure minds. In other Nag Hammadi Gnostic texts, there are adventures of the souls passing through hostile archons in these planetary realms. We find no hostile archons or gatekeepers here. The Hermetic universe is not dangerous or cruel. Accordingly, one can literally sing one's way past the planets. One does so by matching the 7 vowel sounds that the planets produce as they whir through the harp of heaven. Speaking these vowel sounds changes the frequency of one's consciousness so that it can travel through the planetary domains with ease. These vowel sounds appear at the beginning and end of the vision, in both the first and second prayers, respectively. Each vowel sound corresponds to a planet. Thus, by singing the sounds, one can move one's immaterial nous into and beyond the planetary spheres. The association of the 7 vowel sounds with the 7 planets was ancient Pythagorean lore. Each vowel sound is mediated by the long omega sound. One begins with a short alpha and ends with the long pronunciation of the omega, representing the outer planet, or Saturn in this case. Going from alpha to omega, one comprehends all human language and logic. Interestingly, the vowel sounds are not exactly the same in both prayers, and we can assume some kind of textual corruption, especially in the length of the pronounced vowel sounds. And it does seem that the length, not just the sound, was important to have the effect. The 8th realm is the realm above the planetary spheres. In Valentinian thought, it is the realm of the lower wisdom. Souls in the 8th realm are angels doing nothing but hymning the divine with an attitude of pure gratefulness. And one does, it seems, the same in the 9th realm, except here the souls become powers, who exist far past the level of cognition and language. When one becomes a power, it seems that all ego and individuality have faded away. The hymns of both the 8th and the 9th are sung in the silence of nous. Singing in silence means singing in pure thought only with one's consciousness. Other beings of pure consciousness can hear the hymn, even if it's not conveyed by sound waves. Due in large part to the Egyptian local color of this piece, the 8th reveals the 9th was probably composed in Egypt. The text describes itself as written on the original emerald tablets. Emerald is one possible translation of the turquoise stone that was most in tune with Hermes. The text was ordered to be written on this stone and protected by 8 frog-faced male deities and a series of cat-faced female deities. evidently carved into the margins of the tablet or standing as statues beside it. The text was said to be deposited in the temple of Diospolis, the city of Zeus Ammon, or the Egyptian Amun. This is probably Diospolis Magna, or modern Luxor, where there was a sanctuary of Thoth, or Hermes. The text had to be placed or perhaps carved in the temple at an auspicious time, when the planet Mercury, that is Hermes, was in his house, namely in the constellation Virgo, and when Mercury was at the height of his influence or strength. These specific directions indicate that astrology was important to Hermetic communities, even if the point of the text is to propel the nous beyond the powers of the planets. An oath is added to the text to protect it from misuse. In the Hermetic worldview, there was a difference between a spell and a prayer. A prayer is a selfless act involving union or merging with the divine. A spell is more instrumental, using the prayer to ascend past the lords of fate in order to control them and the powers of fate. In terms of date, it's safe to say that the text uses some of the language of the Septuagint when it refers to praying with heart, soul, and strength. The idea of a rational sacrifice is something we find in New Testament texts such as Romans 12:2. The text mentions a pleroma and a triad of beings, the unborn, self-born, and born God. Sethians, of course, mentioned the self-born, or autogenes, and Valentinians used the language of pleroma. But such language was used broadly, and we're not sure who is taking from who. We need not think of a specifically Sethian or Valentinian influence on the tractate. The direction could have gone the other way. Though I think certainly a Sethian or Valentinian might recognize their theology in the text. But I also think that Christians of all stripes could find language in the text that agreed with their theology. Hermes prays to a God called Father who rules a kingdom and who has a logos that comes forth as the birth or product of light. Hermes refers to a spirit who inspires him to speak, and the unborn, self-born, and born gods could be taken as a reference to the Trinity. The oath at the end of the text also mentions 7 lords of being, probably the planets. The being called Xoxothadzo, or Zozozot, is indeed a mystery. He appears as a central character in the first prayer, and his double name, a hidden name of mystery, both opens and closes the vowel sounds. In my view, he is not just a minor gatekeeper, but the Hermetic creator himself, addressed in lofty terms as the supreme being giving shape to reality, including deified souls. It is his name that's probably written on the lapis lazuli stone mentioned at the end of the text. Perhaps the most beautiful lines of the tractate appear at the end of page 60 and the beginning of 61. Here is my attempt to render it, quote, "My consciousness wants to hymn to you daily. I am the instrument of your spirit. My consciousness is the pick. Your counsel plays me as an instrument. I see myself. I receive power from you. Your love has reached us." The 8th reveals the 9th calls itself a holy book, and it has the power to produce a holy generation. Interestingly, the word for book and generation in Coptic is the same, jo'oma, and the text plays with this ambiguity. My hope is that you will discover this book as sacred for your own spirituality and discover depths of meaning beyond what I can convey here. Through it, may you ascend beyond the stars, learning to sing in silence, and become part of a holy generation of powers, hymning in eternal gratitude.